Welcome back. In this module, we're going to talk about risk evaluation. I'm going to get the PowerPoint. Let me get started here. There we go. All right. There we go. Risk evaluation. So far, we have covered establish the context. That's where we get together and decide what we're going to do, what tools we're going to use, who's going to be involved, how much money we have, all that stuff. Kind of for this whole project. It is a big project. Risk assessment, which consists of risk identification, which, as we said, was part of the most important thing. If you don't know something is a risk, you really can't do anything about it. Risk analysis, we'll look at the risk and analyze it. And then we're here at risk evaluation, which is the act of reviewing the risk-based information developed from the hazard identification and risk analysis and comparing that risk level against the organization's established risk criteria to determine acceptability, as well as ranking and prioritizing risks and determining whether the estimated risk is acceptable or risk reduction measures are required. Methods for defining risk criteria can range from simple to risk categories, such as those require treatment and those don't require treatment, to more complex methods that use multiple risk levels with graduated degrees of actions. We're going to go over a couple of them that are out there. Here's just some of the tools that are used to evaluate risk. And you can find a lot of different ones, but we're going to talk about some of them here. Risk indices. The risk index in indices is the whole index. Refers to the combined likelihood and severity of a hazardous event or consequence anticipated from an identified hazard. An example is the Ocean Heat Index, which is developed by the U.S. National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, commonly known as NOAA, that combine both air temperature and relative humidity into a single value that indicates the apparent temperature or how hot the weather will feel. For each risk level, action and protective measures are recommended. So that looks like. This is something as a safety professional you should have at your fingertips when the weather gets hot if you have people working outside or it's so much hot inside too. So this will kind of give you an idea of the danger zone, extreme danger zone, looking at the temperature across the top and the humidity on the side. So obviously the higher humidity and the higher temperature both will create a higher what's going to really feel like. And like I said, you should have this at your ready if you have people working in these temperature extremes. Risk heat maps uses color to represent risk levels. Primary purpose is to visually communicate risk rankings to decision makers in their evaluation of treatment as risk. So the risk scores prediction and risk analysis tools are plotted in the risk heat map for visual comparison. Now here they're giving us showing three things that I'm going to look at it here. Hazard 1, they're saying physical vapor generation and emission and the safety, health, and environmental consequences of explosion, property loss, where risk exposed. So this kind of does these three columns backwards. It gives you the risk level first, and then the severity likelihood. So but severity 4, likelihood 3, 4 times 3 is 12. The risk level 1, risk 1 is 12. And you can see it's plotted on this graph as the 4 severity and 3 likelihood. Hazard 2 is chemical exposure, methanol, blindness, headache, nausea, weakness, or some consequences. So they're giving us severity for likelihood of 2, which made a risk level of 8. And hazard number 3, physical chemical vapor generation, ignition, explosion, local population exposure. And they're giving us severity of 5 and likelihood of 3 for a risk level of 15. And they're plotting these now on this kind of heat map for visual comparison. And you can see that with just 3 of them, I wouldn't think it's any big deal. So if somebody wants a visual thing of it, instead of just looking at this small spreadsheet, there it is. That's called heat map. So ALR, as low as reasonably practical. A level of risk, and this term can be used other than right here too, a level of risk which can be further lowered only by an increase in resource expenditure that is disproportionate in relation to the resulting decrease in risk. Now you can see if you're going to do something like this, you have to have a pretty good handle on what the risk is, because you're going to make a decision to not do anything else because it's going to be a disproportionate expenditure on it. But this is kind of what it is here. Again, you can see this isn't really much different from the risk matrix that we're going to look at a little bit that we're going to use. We have used. It's unacceptable risk, and then I have a couple of good risk points, low risk. So it's really not that much. A lot of these things aren't really that different from the 5x5 matrix that we're going to look at, we're going to use. And then ISO 31010 presents a simple concept of evaluating risk to the three levels using evaluating risk. And the three levels there are unacceptable, immediate action required, operation not permissible, except in rare and extraordinary circumstances. Usually the operation is immediately stopped until the risk is reduced to acceptable level. Now, sometimes you can take the intermediate measures. One time they set up some new equipment in St. Louis, and they were having one heck of a time. But on what the operator was, there were some exposed gears and pulleys and stuff. They were pretty close to where people were working. And I was down there and I was told, you guys got to do guardrails for these things. There's too much of exposure here. And it wasn't pretty high on their priority. They had to get this line running. And so I sometimes you have to do something on an interim basis. So I actually had them, it was a pretty intricate guard, so they could slide together. But they put together a guard out of cardboard and duct tape. And I said that's fine for for a couple of days until we can get the other guard made. And that's what they did. So we probably guarded it. It wasn't the best guard, it wasn't the approved guard, but it was a guard. And it was something that nobody earned. So sometimes that's what you have to do when you have extraordinary measures. Marginal, with the costs and benefits of further risk treatment are evaluated before continuing. So here you go. Now you got something like, can we do this? I really want to spend this money on it. What can we do? Acceptable, where the risk level is considered negligible and requires no further risk treatment. We wish they all were there, but they're not going to be. So that's their kind of three major levels of risk evaluation in ISO. Now, a risk matrix uses likelihood and severity to establish a number, or sometimes there's used on the IAR one, indicating risk level. A very common method of one which is used extensively in this course. And this is it. Now, this is the same spreadsheet that we've just seen before, the 5x5. It just doesn't come across when you plug it into take the spreadsheet and plug it into a PowerPoint. But it's the same thing. You have across the top, you have likelihood of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Very unlikely, possible, likely, and very likely. And then you have the levels going from the bottom up of severity. 1 is first aid or no injury or illness. 2 is injury, illness, no lost days. 3, injury, illness with 1 or more days away from work. 4, permanent partial disability, hospitalization of 3 or more. And 5, death or permanent disability. And that's for health effects on people. And then these two columns are helpful because sometimes the damage might not be people, it might be a property or environment. So now we go down from bottom up on property and environment to light, moderate, and then significant property and for the environment, moderate, reversible. And then number 4 is severe property for the environment, it's significant, but it's reversible. And number 5 for property damage is catastrophic, for environmental impact, it's significant. And then I colored the numbers in there, but on the one that's a spreadsheet, they're all the whole cell colored. You get the idea. At the bottom is hard to read. Very high risk is 15 or greater, high risk 10 to 14, moderate risk 5 to 9, and low risk 1 to 4. So you have 4 levels instead of 3. So even though this was mentioned earlier, the ISO one presented the concept using 3 levels, unacceptable, marginal, acceptable. This 5x5 matrix, which are 4 levels. So the 4 levels being very high, moderate, and low. And it's not really a significant difference from the ISO. They're actually saying you set those 2 intermediate levels. You can level them together if you want to, but it gives you just a little bit more separation in those levels. And there's not a lot to the evaluation part of this thing, so that's about it. And this 5x5 risk matrix I showed on previous slides is on Blackboard under risk management information. There's a folder in there called risk management information, and that's in there. So here's what we've covered up until now. Establish the context. Again, that's where we get together and decide what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, what we're going to use, what risks are important to us, who's going to belong to it, how much money we have, and when that's done, all this stuff. If it's a big project, if it's just a one thing that you're probably not going to do, it's just a short thing. Risk identification, you got to identify what the hazards and risks are, because if you don't know what they are, you can't do anything about them. Risk analysis, you need to look at them pretty closely, and risk evaluation, what we just talked about. So up next is risk treatment, and that'll be the next slide. Thanks. That's it for now.